Senhoras e senhores, bom dia. É com satisfação que damos início ao quarto e último dia do workshop on Climate in the City, Subsidies and Instruments for Sustainability and Resilience in Urban Planning and Design. Segundo a programação do evento, daremos início à palestra com o tema Climate and Health Governance in German Cities. A palestrante convidada é a professora doutora Heike Köckler, graduada em Planejamento do Território pela Universidade Técnica de Dortmund e doutora em Indicadores de Sustentabilidade pela mesma universidade. Trabalhou na Universidade Técnica de Dortmund e no Centro de Pesquisa em Sistemas Ambientais da Universidade de Kassel. Em 2016, obteve especialização em Processamentos de Justiça Ambiental pela Universidade de Kassel. Desde 2015, é docente do Departamento de Saúde Pública da Universidade de Ciências da Saúde em Bochum, Alemanha, onde atua na docência e pesquisa sobre ambiente e saúde de comunidades.
Okay. Bom dia, thank you.
Bom dia. Good morning.
Good morning to you. So I start now with my presentation. First of all, I would really like to thank for your invitation and giving me the opportunity to talk with you about a very important topic. And in Germany at the moment, we really realize how important climate adaptation and health is, because I talked in advance about the temperature you have. In Germany, it's at the moment hotter at day and at night than in Brazil, what is a bit uncommon for us. So climate change is not only an academic debate, it's part of everyday lives, and the people active in the healthcare service and health promotion, health prevention start talking more and more about this topic that is of greater relevance and longer history also for us as urban planners or environmental researchers. I was asked to give you some thoughts and some ideas on climate and health, so the nexus between them, and how in German cities we govern or have governance and maybe some government on that. And I bring you examples from 2 cities with. What's important for me, and so from the content, but also already from the take-home message, is I'm glad if in this short presentation I can really make clear to you how the nexus, the interconnection between health and climate is, that it is really interlinked. In health policies, we have a concept that is called health in all policies. And this really is a good strategy to tackle complex problems in government and governance and society. And last but not least, I bring examples from governance and government from 2 cities and 2 community participatory examples. And then I'm really glad to discuss with you. I'm afraid I don't speak Portuguese, Brazilian, so German is great, English is great, and otherwise I need support in translation. On this slide, I took it from the WHO, shows what the nexus between climate and health is. We have climate change, and I don't think I have to explain to you that we have climate change because you are experts on climate modeling and other aspects. And what is important from a health perspective, that the climate change situation meets on different vulnerabilities. And these vulnerabilities are, on the one hand, factors within society, so demographic factors or geographic factors, biological ones, socio-political conditions, and socio-economic factors. So we know that older people with low income, less contact in a city that has bad ventilation, suffer more, are more vulnerable to the same amount of heat, like people who are of better health, have more income, and can, for example, afford any kind of climate protection. We have different exposure pathways with extreme weather events, but also a permanent heat stress It is always or often combined with air quality, a point I will make bigger later as well when we talk about multiple burdens, understand climate change not only as a single factor. Water scarcity is something we are facing in Europe at the moment more than we have ever done before. What is very close connected to food security, because we all know that water scarcity leads to less harvest. And we have vector distribution and other ecological reasons. In the health system and the capacity with resilience, what is really what we are working on at our Department of Community Health is how does the healthcare system respond to climate change, and how is it able to react? I will not talk about this in much detail to you because you are not healthcare professionals, but how is the health workforce prepared? Which information is in the system about drinking enough, about heat prevention, and essential medical products and technologies available? Is service delivered? And last but not least, is it financed? Then on the bottom, you see different climate sensitive health risks that I think most of you have at least somehow heard about. So if we have this major weather events, there could just be injuries, or we have heat reaction on specific illnesses. All the question of respiratory disease are important. And there again, we are with multiple burdens. And if we, for example, have a situation where we already have a bad environmental quality and the bad air quality, therefore a highish level of respiratory diseases in general, and then have heat stress, and then have a pandemic like we face in the moment all over the world with COVID-19, we see that there is more morbidity or even mortality. So I do not want to go through all of these examples, but I wanted to stress this respiratory one, as it is something showing that things are very, very interconnected. We have also effects directly on health system and facilities and outcomes, like income impacts on healthcare facilities. We had to face a major flooding in Germany last year, and some hospitals had to close down and had to be evacuated and have not been properly prepared for that, or homes of elderly or homes for disabled people. There we even had some cases, people dying because it was not well prepared for such a flooding event that we did not expect to have. So this is really a big topic, and climate and health are very, very interconnected. This is the worldwide view from WHO. I shared the slides so you can access them. I put the links down, and you find much more information on this online. If the nexus of climate and health is a new one for you. We have another model that is not only linked to climate. It's the health map from Grant and Barton, and they show that health is I think you cannot see my mouse, but I explain it from the middle. So that health is determined by very different factors. In the center, we have the people, like age, sex, and other factors. Then we have the lifestyle component. Then we know, I talked already about it, social capital and networks that we have. Then the local economy, then activities I'm doing, then built environment, then natural environment, and then the global environment. I do not go through the whole model because bits and pieces we have seen before on health and climate. And this model just explains we have several determinants of health. So health is not just influenced by the healthcare system, not just influenced by your age or genetics, or not just influenced by your lifestyle. And we have to think all these aspects together. If we have such models that confront us with complexity, we can say, oh, it's too complex, we cannot handle it. I'm a positive person and I'm an engineer by training, so I say that's great. We have different opportunities for action and different opportunities for governance on the local level, and for this, what I come to, health in all policies. And health in all policies is a concept from the World Health Organization that is really within the thinking of this and comparable models, because it says you have to integrate health in different kind of policies. I am, as Simone said at the beginning, by training an urban planner. So urban planning really deals with a lot of those determinants of health that you see in this model. So we can talk about buildings and places in the built environment, about stress and roots, but we can also offer places for activity, and we can even give opportunities for social networks and good situations. So urban planning should be healthy urban development, healthy urban planning. And we can go through this in other aspects as well, like all the environment policy is, as we saw on heat and health, also in most steps also a health policy. So this is really important to see if we want to promote health, if we want to keep people healthy against heat, we have to integrate it in different fields of politics. And it's interesting to talk with politicians, people in administrations from all government level, and work out with them why health is important for them. And the question should not be, what can you do for health? But it should be much more, why is health important for your work? So, what do I, as an urban planner, have a benefit from if I plan any healthy environments? I give a big contribution to quality life, and I have functioning cities for all. What is an important difference in this health and all policies approach is to say we have a whole of society approach and a whole of government. The whole of society, as we talk about climate and climate change, is in climate adaptation and climate change for sure pretty much seen in the big movement on Fridays for Future. So the whole of society, starting from the young people, said there must happen something now. And we as a society want a change against global warming. On the other hand, we have the whole of government approach if we talk about an in all policies approach. And here I just, as I go deeper in the example, the city of Münster, it's a medium-sized city in the middle of Germany. Here I just took a photo of the city council. So the whole of government also has to deal with the topic. I mentioned before that we have from WHO this health in all policies approach. And I always give the argument to say with climate change regarding mitigation and adaptation, it's also an in all policies approach because relevant gases are produced in housing, in industry, in agriculture, and so on. So climate protection can just be done by all the different policy fields, and the climate adaptation, adaptation also has to be in the different parts, as I mentioned before. So health in all policies and climate in all policies is what we should think about if we think about governing the challenge of health and climate. I bring to you now the example of Münster, as the two photos before showed that the whole of society in Münster is saying we want climate change and we want it now. So this is what the Fridays for Future are always calling for. And on the other hand, the city council adopted this and tries a whole of government approach. And this, for me, is very important for local governance. Does the city public support it? In Münster in 2019, as a reaction on the Fridays for Future movement, like other cities in Germany, they called the so-called Klimanotstand. It's my own translation. I don't know if there's a proper English word. It's a state of emergency on climate. So the city council said, we accept that we can no longer wait and that we have a state of emergency on climate. And the city of Münster said that it wants to be climate neutral until 2030. So a clear goal, Münster, unser Klima 2030, our climate in 2030, we are to be climate neutral. So each decision taken by the city council has to be proven if it has any kind of contribution or at least no negative effect on the climate um, accounting that we have in the city. On the other hand, there is a positive vision on mitigation, and this is an umbrella for the city of Münster, you see on the left side of the slide. So protecting against heat and protecting against major rainfalls. Just very briefly, Münster became one of 1,000 climate neutral and smart cities in Europe. So it's this is a European Union-wide program on reducing emissions in the whole of Europe. We have the so-called Green Deal, where from the European level on, they try really to green the economy. They know that it does not work without the cities, so they need municipalities and cities to be an active player on climate adaptation and climate mitigation. And so they selected and awarded southern cities in Europe, and Münster is one of them. And it has a clear climate city contract saying what to reach when, by which measures. I'm afraid most stuff is in German language only, but if you are more interested in, don't hesitate as a participant to get in contact with me, and I can share information and maybe guide you through some of the documents. One of the measures, so having a big logo, a nice vision, is the one hand. What we need is real measures. And Münster was facing a major rainfall in 2014. And as some people of you are knowing in hydrology, you know that 292 liters per square meter in 7 hours is definitely too much. So there was a major rainfall and there was a major flooding with people dying and lots of buildings being affected by that. And after this major event, they started different rainwater management systems on canals. And as you see on the right photo, structuring of river basins from very dense rivers to open and back to nature riversides. What they also do, and this is not only about the government, but also the governance, is give information to the people about the thermal comfort of their houses. So each house owner can find detailed information on thermal imaging of his house, his or her house, and think about, on the one hand, insulation measures, but on the other hand, also about positive sides for solar energy. So again, we have this adaptation and mitigation side. And this is just the map of Münster and the thermal image, but you can go deep and find it. You can see very, very good where we have trees and lakes, where it is white. I want to bring an additional aspect to you. What I showed for Münster does really say there is a city that wants to go and have this climate contract and reduce the climate emissions by 2030 to zero and have different adaptation measures. Additionally, I would like to share a concept with you that I also discussed with the colleagues before who are running the workshop. This is the question of environmental justice, and environmental justice puts a focus on something that I have not emphasized yet so much, but just a little bit at the beginning when I introduced the WHO figure on health and heat. It says that we always need a socially different view on how heat and flooding and other aspects turn out in a social dimension? Is there any kind of social inequality regarding to the people who suffer from heat or flooding? This is a graph from Gordon Walker. He's a geography and he's from the UK. He works a lot and does outstanding work on environmental justice. And he made very clear that at the first level, to go for environmental justice, we need some evidence and we really need to describe how things are. So to be descriptive. The flooding in Münster, I do not know any study about looking at social differences about the impact of the flooding. The same at the moment in this major flooding in another area in Germany. So we are not always used to have a look at the social dimension of major climate events. Furthermore, not only to show the evidence, but we also have to explain why things are how they are, to understand if we know, for example, from heat that people who are more, that older people die. We had this heat wave in Paris at the beginning of this century where a lot of older people died. And the WHO took out detailed studies and found out that these were people living alone, so having less social networks and social capital, living under the roof, and having less opportunities for ventilation. So these have been different reasons that first had to be described, but then to be understood and explained within models to understand about different reasons that lead, for example, to mortality under heat waves. And on the other hand, environmental justice is a normative concept. We need a discussion on how things ought to be. Do we accept that people die due to heat or that they die earlier? So lots of old people died. A big normative and ethic debate. On the first moment, everybody says, yes, it should be just, yeah. But what about situations of injustice and how to deal with them? So we do not only have to stop at the descriptive level, what is unjust, we also have to bring it to the normative point, what is just. And here municipalities again play an important role. In Germany, the municipalities govern themselves on a very high degree. So they take a lot of decisions on urban land use, on financing, on different aspects. And so the city council, therefore I included the picture of the whole of government on the local level, has to take very often decisions with a justice dimension. If they spend money in a specific neighborhood, they don't spend it in another. If they allow another environmental burden, environmentally harm production in a specific neighborhood where vulnerable people live, they may increase environmental justice within one city. As we think this is important and we really have to start with the question on how things are, we developed a system or a map on describing multiple burdens and vulnerability. I don't have the time to go in detail today, but again, here I can share English and German papers describing how we measure this model. We call it the SUHE model, the Spatial Urban Health Equity Indicators model, and it compares within a city, is there a higher share of specific resources or burdens. On the bottom, you can see three different maps. One is on Grünflächen. The other is on heat, Wärmeinseln, heat islands, and another is on noise. All three factors are relevant for health. If I have less access to green, more heat and more noise, I'm more exposed. We know for different reasons that people with a low socioeconomic status and low income have less resources to deal with environmental burdens. And therefore, we added another dimension. It is here described as social transfer SGB2 quota, and this could be low or very high. So if we have areas with different environmental burdens and less resources, who are showed on the central map as dark blue, so they have a very high, sehr hoch in the map, a very high and a multiple burden, and they have a low socioeconomic status, we call these areas hotspot areas. And this picture is of the city of Herne. And we developed this map together with people from the environment department because they started to work on a climate action plan. And they said, we do not only want to take into account heat, we know that we need something about the vulnerability and that we need about other health relevant factors like noise. Noise is in this city, especially noise from transport, and very important and a very major problem. Somehow in the middle east of this map, you see the city center, and I come back to the city center of this city, the city of Herne, pretty soon. So we developed a map that gives a broad screening and broad information for decision makers who want to run a climate action plan and to enable them to see it's not just heat. You have to take into account the vulnerability and additional aspects. And as I was asked to talk about governance and government on the local level, I like to take this and bring this with you to show that this is one aspect for decision makers to take into account. The city of Herne developed a so-called roadmap, a Handlungsstrategie. This is a strategy for action on climate adaptation. And this was done by the city, financed from the European Union to a certain degree, and run by a river management association. And in this roadmap, they included our analysis on multiple burdens to come to so-called hotspot areas and to identify areas where action has to be taken first, and all the measures are to be implemented by the city of Herne. And there are different examples, and I just very briefly show you how a city deals with it. On the one hand, there's just a satellite image of this city center of the city of Herne. Then they have a real use mapping, what kind of use is existing. And on the bottom, it is in German, I'm afraid, but I translate for you in English. They refer to the SUHE analysis, and they say that this area has a very high share of multiple burdens, low green share, very high heat island, and very high noise ratio, and at the same time a high social vulnerability represented by this transfer income quote. So they really referred to the analysis as one argument to have a focus on this area for action. Then they developed a map to evaluate the vulnerability. So the spatial exposure and vulnerability towards climate consequences in the city of Herne. And they developed areas with a higher degree of multiple burdens, specific areas only on heat, an orange color, on water, so on major rainfalls, and showed how extreme the rain is in some areas. What is important for governments and government is who is owning which plot of land, because then you have more opportunity to act. Because if you, as a city, are the owner of a plot of land, you can realize interventions. If not, you have to convince the owner of the plot of land measures to be taken. Therefore, it is really shown which does belong to the city itself. Then we have hospitals with the Red Cross. Then we have caring homes, especially for the elderlies, schools and kindergartens that are mapped here as vulnerable institutions who might be exposed. And then there is a list of interventions. It's just for the same hotspot area where they say, wow, it's the city center. There's a lot of different burdens, and we have different measures and interventions to take. Each interventions, we are very German, has a clear ID. So BKS 02 means they want to have a green axis for fresh air, and describe exactly where it is. Or they have a lot on green roofs and different aspects on that, or integrate water in public and open space. So there are very clear interventions that are to be done, mainly by the city council itself, but, and this is the same for the city of Herne and the city of Münster, also with the city society as a whole, if you talk about governance. And in this part, I again want to emphasize for both examples that it is relevant to know who owns the land and is able to do any kind of intervention in his or her building stock, for example. Therefore, we have the map on the thermal situation in the city of Münster, or here the map which plots are owned by the city of Herne. These are the two examples I wanted to share with you on municipalities, so Herne and Münster, but you find in almost every German city by now a climate adaptation plan. We have so-called climate managers, people who work in the city and try to integrate adaptation and mitigation in the development of the city. Finally, for the last minutes, I think I have some time left, I would bring with you as one important element of governance the aspect of community participation. Because if you think again of this model of health, we know that individual living situations are very important. And knowing the specific needs on the personal factors, but also the lifestyle, the neighborhood, the environment, means that we need specific solutions with and for specific communities. What does community mean for us? Communities could be defined from outside scientifically. So if I have a look, if I use, for example, my SUHE analysis, from outside, I have a look and say, I look at the neighborhoods who are more deprived, who are more vulnerable. For this, I use existing data, so with all its limitations. But for example, I say I take the transfer level on transfer income if people are of low income, for example. So I know deprived people. Or what is a big topic in Germany too is if people have a migration background, they are not as flexible on the housing market as others are. They should be, but they are not for different reasons. Or is there a specific situation for disabled people? So I may have a definition of disabled people, which I look at. On the other hand, it could be defined by people themselves. Which community do you feel to belong to? So I might say that somebody belongs to the big group of Turkish migrants in Germany. So we have lots of people who came in the 1960s from Turkey to work in Germany and stayed, but maybe their grandchildren do not feel Turkish anymore. So it might be my perception from outside, but not the inside perception. Or a definition by oneself might, for example, that one defines as part of the Fridays for Future movement that you saw before on one of the photos. Communities might have a joint interest, for example, the Fridays for Future, and this as a global movement. It might be comparable in vulnerability towards a threat. So I may have a look at the elderly. I may have a look at the elderly living alone, a look at the elderly living alone under the roof with no social contact. So they might be of a specific threat or people against flooding. And communities might be addressed different due to time resources they have, due to educational background and competencies they have, due to accessibility through social media, and so on and so on. And so community participation on urban climate topics, I just bring very, very brief 2 examples for you. In Germany, it is very fancy to do any kind of urban gardening. Urban gardening, and I think even as you know in Brazil as well, in Europe, we face a war in the state of Ukraine, and this leads to different changes even in food production and food care, and more people think about regional production, local production. So things really come together on this aspect of urban gardening, local production, and so on. I took this photo from the city of Berlin, and Berlin is at the moment so keen on having put their urban gardening on the agenda that if you have a look at the website, it is visitberlin.de, so it is marketing from the tourism area, and you can find all the urban gardening projects in Berlin. So whenever you come to Berlin and are keen on urban gardening, you could find them and go there. And urban gardening really is not just producing the food, but is also empowering people, building neighborhood, and having the will and fighting for the right to take part in the design of the city. So urban gardening is more than growing groceries. It's also about empowerment and participation. This might, again, lead to better networks. This might have a positive effect on the green in the area. But we are all aware, and I think this is no difference from Brazilian society to German society, that not everyone is keen on urban gardening. And this again is a specific community being attracted by such approaches. Another much broader approach on participation, and this is my last point I want to make for today, is bringing any kind of participatory tools to have communities more outspoken, to learn more about their needs. And this is a tool that we are working with in Germany as well, but it was developed in Scotland and United Kingdom, and it's the so-called Place Standard tool. The Place Standard tool was developed by architects and planners, bringing together this integrated view of health and determinants of health to use it for dialogue with different people from the city. This might be citizens, but this might also be relevant stakeholders. And this brings me back to the task to talk about governance. Because with everything we have to do on climate protection and climate adaptation, the government itself is not able to realize it in all parts. It plays one major role, but it is not able to bring all the adaptation and mitigation by itself. And having asked the people, the normal, regular citizens, or specific stakeholders in this complex integrated view is of great use. So within the Place Standard tool, we have different dimensions on transport, on sense of control, on traffic and parking, and so on. I do not go through all the dimensions. You can really find this online and have a check on that. You can discuss with people and ask to evaluate their neighborhood on specific points. And then you can discuss with them and talk about potential solutions. So it's an assessment tool for places, including quantitative and qualitative information. It can be applied by everyone, and it can be applied in urban or rural contexts for whole cities or selected neighborhoods. The tool is a bit older now, so it is a few years old now. And what was done at the moment as well in UK as in Germany is integrate the topic of climate climate adaptation and climate change in the place standard tool. Because again, this all policies approach in Germany, we decided to integrate climate question in each of the dimension of the place standard tool, and not to set up an own climate question. How do you feel about climate change? It is much more on, is your transport limited due to due to heat, or how important is the green space for you in heat times, and so on and so on. So here is the adaptation from Scotland, and they also say that with the climate lens, they want to integrate the topic of climate change into the place standard tool, and it should be, this is the bottom line, a way for communities and organizations to work together to consider how to design local responses to climate change holistically and help achieve other local priorities. And this really is a good final sentence for this presentation, to say what climate governance on the local level should be about. I finish with this Scottish slide, although I was invited to speak about Germany, but we use this tool in Germany too. And I think it is a good example that we need workshops, conferences like this to exchange between different countries, to learn from each other, to deal with the major challenges we have. And I think this was the last slide. And I really thank for your attention and really look forward for any kind of comments and discussion.
Thank you, Heike, for your excellent lecture. And now we are ask the students and if they have any questions for you. Alguém gostaria de fazer alguma pergunta para a professora Heike? Professor Hugo will make a question.
Thank you very much, Heike, for your presentation. It's incredible the difference between your country and the rest of the world, and particularly Latin America. I mean, many of the fundamentals that you have in your country are not present in Latin America. So the difficulties to create local government, strong local governments with enough coordination between the decision makers and the science and the communities are a very, very important challenge that we have to develop in our countries. So in this sense, I appreciate very much your lessons and experiences, because we have to learn a lot. But at the same time, we have to realize that there are very big differences among countries, and that each of us will not be possible to solve a global issue like climatic change alone. This is so. In any case, the international cooperation, particularly in scientific terms, is very, very relevant. So we appreciate your presence in our network also. And in reality, I will wish much more to have you constantly in our discussion and seminars, because we have to learn a lot and we have to exchange a lot of ideas.
Yeah. Thank you.
For us, it's quite, sorry. For us, it's quite difficult to separate climatic change priorities from social, economical, and other priorities. So in this sense, it seems that for us it's more important to try to understand this whole idea you have, the totality of the issue. So if we are planning to solve climatic change challenges, at the same time we have to solve problems related with social economical development, housing, and of course health and everything. So this is a big challenge to try to propose to the politician and to the community that we are not fighting only against climatic change, but we are fighting against poverty, social segregation, and of course, lack of justice. No, you were talking about justice. For us, the most common word is injustice, and we are full of evidence. No, we don't need much more research to realize that, for instance, every year here in Brazil and in whole Latin America, floods are very common. No, or the most interesting thing now is that we are observing inside the cities very, very important lack of justice in climatic terms, particularly in ventilation and particularly in temperature distribution. So our idea of social justice is becoming much complex than, again, because it's not only climatic justice, it's also all the rest of the aspects. We need a general process of increasing justice in our decisions and in our life. So thank you very much for all the ideas. I have two questions, however. The first one is, what do you mean with climatic neutrality? Because in Latin America, everybody's talking today about carbon neutrality. No? But what is the real meaning of this? I understand more general concepts than carbon. And the second question, what is vulnerability multiple burden? Because you gave it a lot of a clear importance at local governance scale. But how do you define and what are the indicators that you're using to create this integrated indicator? Because it's quite important for us, because in this case, vulnerability should be probably a more integrating concept than only climatic terms. That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And I really agree on what you said. And maybe just one comment on the different situation between Germany and Brazil. It is very different. And for sure, my intention is not to copy German government to America do Sul. So there should be own answers with own history and own background. But if we find projects, interventions that work, we have to understand, for example, I pointed out several times the situation of home ownership. And I know that the question of land ownership is a very different one in your country than in our country. And the rights that are connected with this. And so we really have to understand what are the frame in which we behave and in which we govern, and then to learn how could we transfer the examples really to working ones, and really understand our history, our background, our system well. Very brief on climate neutral really is a bit more than carbon neutral, because we just include the other relevant greenhouse gases, because for sure it's not only carbon, we have methane and we have all the other aspects, and therefore we talk about neutrality for the climate, and we have the definition of which gases we include. And I like this because for sure it is more than CO2, and we have other emissions that we have to take into account. And some people, I guess not in this audience, but some really reduces just on carbon emissions. What are good indicators for a vulnerability analysis and a multiple burden analysis? This should be an own lecture and a long discussion, but to make it brief, we developed this model on spatial urban health equity indicators to give one aspect in this sectoral plans that are developed in Germany. We have a noise action plan, we have an air quality plan, we have a climate plan, we have a water management plan. So we are very planned. We have a lot of paper. Some comes into action, but it's all on a sectoral environmental factor. and usually in no way, not from the legal basis, taking the social dimension into account. And you made it a very important point to say we have this inequalities and we need answers for this in a holistic, integrated way. And by this model, we want nothing else than put it in the discussion, and are glad that they start to use this model in climate adaptation planning and, for example, in noise action planning now. If we give suggestions to municipalities which indicators to choose, we say they must have a health effect, and we take these evidence from big epidemiological studies. So we know for sure that noise has a health effect, and we know that people of lower income, for whatever reasons, for different reasons, are affected more than high income people because they can move, they can have passive noise insulation, and so on. And so we really discuss this vulnerability aspect according to the burden that we are looking at, the exposure. And the SUHE model should be really seen in a context. Do I use it for heat adaptation planning? It might include different indicators than if I have a plan on another topic. I hope it referred a little bit and or gave a response a little bit. And the SUHE model should be easy to run, because you said an important point. We have a lot of evidence, we have a lot of data, and sometimes we just have to integrate it on a higher level or on a better resolution to have the proper information for decision makers, proper in this holistic approach. So data availability is one hard criteria for running the model.
Mais perguntas, pessoal? Quem gostaria de fazer alguma pergunta para a professora Heike? Tem mais uma pergunta. One more question, Heike.
Hello, Heike. Thank you very much for your lecture. I would like to know how these new issues are influencing the universities, how they teach the students, how the courses are oriented to look at these issues as in a more integrated way, how they are influencing the universities and the courses.
Thank you, Eleonora, for your question. I think very important in this university context to reflect on teaching and education, what we are doing. One example I can give from my university, I'm at a university that has a focus on public health. And we developed a bachelor's program, for example, having a focus on use of digital data. And we said none of the students should leave or receive his or her bachelor without learning at least a little bit of geoinformation, because this is not so common in the health sector. So usually you have geographers and they try to learn a bit about health, but we said they should at least be able to run easy GIS mapping and presenting and some data analysis. We started this course something like 3 years ago, and I received my first bachelor on running the SUHE model for a city in our region. And so the students again have an effect on the city because they had their discussions, so a very active student. And so bringing them the methods to bring the answers from this holistic perspective is one thing that I think is very, very important. So having a methodological competence on giving the spatial answers to the problems, I think, is one important answer. Another is on having courses being as flexible to respond on present topics. So my students always have to do a concept for a social, for a place. And they were all invited to develop concept on resilient cities. And first, some of them felt a bit uncomfortable by bringing their health care and health aspect onto the aspect of resilience, including environmental aspects, including heat and flooding. And then they were very glad to learn about that and produced very good results by integrating and discussing. So it is a bit a broad answer because it might be a different answer for a more technical university or a health university. But having a good basic knowledge and then the methodological capability to deal with such a holistic and complex view, I think this is really our task to train the students for the future challenges they have to face when they are working or left our universities.
Thank you, Heike. Thank you for your excellent lecture. And now, we would like to thank you again for your lecture. Agradecemos a participação da professora doutora Heike Köckler. Neste momento, teremos um intervalo de 15 minutos para coffee break e, na sequência, daremos continuidade com a mesa redonda Scientific Information for Municipal Climate Plans.
Okay, bye, Simon.
Okay, bye, Heike. I cannot see you anymore, but